One. Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Sam Sugar again, recording another victim video, as we have been doing the end of this year. I'm pleased to be joined by Roger Hillygus, who is, I'll let him introduce himself again. I want to tell everybody who's watching these videos, if you haven't read this book yet, please get it. It's very inexpensive. I spent a lot of time putting this together to save you the trouble of asking a million questions and to educate you about what goes on in guardianships. Now we're done with that. Roger, please introduce yourself.
My name is Roger Hillygus. I'm currently living in Dayton, Nevada, which is outside of Carson City. And my case is occurring in the 2nd Judicial District Court in Reno, Nevada.
I see. And tell me when all of this began. We'll go right back to the very beginning or even a little before. How did this whole business get started and who's involved?
Well, let me start back at the beginning and explain briefly how this began. My parents were married for 52 years. They were both diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's back in the 2000s. Back in the middle 2000s, my mother inherited a substantial amount of money from her parents in Southern California. I've got an estranged sibling who thought it was important to take my parents, who were diminished in their capacity, to Idaho to purchase properties with the inheritance, which was placed into the family trust. So his trust assets were being used to purchase properties in another state. That was in the mid-2000s. In about 2010, 11, and 12, my mother started contacting myself and my wife, complaining that her husband, my father, was doing bizarre activities. And when I say bizarre activities, he had a picture of Maria Duval, and I asked people to look her name up. Maria Duval is an attractive older woman. He had a picture of her in his wallet telling people that this was his wife because my mother was diminished in her capacity, but she was not incapacitated. She was just suffering old age and starting to progress in her disease. He also was involved in sweepstakes, where he was writing $5 to $25 checks multiple times a day to the tune of $20,000 in about 6 months. He was purchasing a vehicle about once every 6 months. He was involved in insurance claims. So at that point, I decided that they needed some more help, so I started becoming more and more involved to see what was really happening. And all of what I just mentioned was happening. So what I didn't realize, and they shortly, about this same time, they gave me the trust and the powers of attorney that they had put in place back in the early 90s with a lawyer that was still involved in their life. I was their power of attorney for healthcare, durable power of attorney for financial. I was their trustee, a successor trustee to their trust. So I started trying to protect both of them from any more financial exploitation, which was occurring, I believe, with my estranged sibling. That's when the lawyers got involved. And I've been, since 2013, involved in quite a large number of court appearances and hearings.
So just to summarize, your parents their mental capacities were dwindling and you wanted to protect them because you had been the person they selected to protect them through their advance directives. Does that pretty much sum it up?
That does. Like I said, they did that back in the early 90s. I wasn't even in the country at the time. I had no idea until this started developing what they had put together. But once I looked at everything and it looked properly done, I just wanted to have the authority to help and assist them. I didn't believe a guardianship was ever needed. They weren't neither one of them at the beginning were in need of a guardianship. And I still believe they was never a need for a guardianship because I was...
Why do you say that? Other than the fact that they nominated as per their wishes, do you think there was another way to help them short of a guardianship? In other words, a way to create the best interests for the ward without a drastic intervention like a guardianship?
As far as I was concerned, everything was put in place and it was properly done through the powers of attorney for financial and healthcare. I'd met with many banking institutions and financial people and mortgage companies and on, federal government, Social Security, and they looked at everything and they approved on the documents and they...
So how did those documents wind up not being adhered to?
The family court judge, this was all done in the Second Judicial District Court in Reno, and the family court judge basically took the allegations of the attorney and of the attorneys, who I later found out they were all working together, on face value. There was no hearing, there was no clear and convincing evidence, there was no testimony, expert or otherwise, there was no affidavits, there was nothing but the attorney's word. And it went from there.
And as we all know, and as we're learning in all these videos, attorneys can lie in court without any consequences whatsoever, because attorneys are never sworn in. They're the only people in court proceedings other than the judge who can say whatever they feel like saying and get away with it. And as a result, begin the vilification of people like you and other people who might object to the court's intervention into a person's life where it might be needed. So what happened then?
Well, my wife and I we started to help my parents on a weekly basis, and then it became a bi-weekly basis, and then it was 3 times a week. And when it got to 4 days a week, we put our life on hold and we moved to Reno, which is 60 miles away, to care for my parents. And at that time, we were caring for both of them. This was back in 2013.
No worries. Go ahead.
In 2013, we continued to care for my parents, and at some point there was a family decision that was made with the 4 family members. Because my father was continuing to act in strange behavior, including propositioning the investment advisor secretary, his attorney's secretary, every woman that he came in contact with, he was like reverting to a teenager. That's all he thought about, was trying to have a new relationship with another woman, because he felt that my mother...
So clearly there was a need there for assistance. But how did it wind up that a guardian outside your family and outside yourself wound up taking care of all of this? How did they get involved?
At the point when I was ordered as the trustee and the guardian of my mother to pay the 5 attorneys, basically the remainder of the funds in my parents' savings account, which was over $150,000, I chose to place them into bankruptcy. And when the judge and the attorneys heard the word bankruptcy, they had me removed immediately.
I guess they were concerned that their fees wouldn't be paid.
That's exactly what they were concerned about.
And I imagine that did not sit well with any of the court insiders, including your own lawyers.
Well, they were included. In fact, the amount of money that was owed to them was more than anyone else. I figured going to a large firm at the beginning to stop this whole thing and file a motion to dismiss, because there was no reason for any court proceedings. I felt the documents were all in place, and they continued to convince me otherwise. And what they use is they want people to get into stipulations so that the court doesn't have to make an order based on statutes, laws, contracts, and what they should be doing, is looking at the documents that are in place.
Now, you've become something of an expert. I've spoken to you, and you have a tremendously deep understanding of how this industry works. And you've been fighting a long battle against it. How many years is it now?
I finally went out on my own and started reading all the statutes, all the rules, all the regulations and regarding courts. And I've been doing this now for 3 years on my own. And I filed appeals in the Supreme Court. I filed in federal court regarding racketeering and ADA violations. And I continue to fight today. In fact, I've been granted permission by the Nevada Supreme Court to appeal to the United States Supreme Court. And I'm in the beginning phases of filing what's called a writ of certiorari with the United States Supreme Court.
And you've gotten about as far as anybody I know has so far. And of course, that takes an enormous amount of time and energy for someone who isn't a lawyer. Tell me what impact that has had on your life and on your wife's lives and on your family's life.
It's had a tremendous impact on my relationship with my wife, obviously. It's had a tremendous impact on my health. I've missed appointments. I work on this pretty much day and night. I'm constantly researching and writing documents and filing documents in the court to no avail.
And because you've been in this for a while, and you know people have been in it for 20 years, how would you describe the government's response when someone like you brings to their attention the violation of statutes, the violation of codes, the violation of constitutional rights? How would you characterize their response to you?
It's pretty much non-existent. That's the part that's scary, because our rights are being violated, the Constitution is being violated, and they believe that because a court is involved and that there's orders from a judge, that those are the only thing that matter. When in fact, the court is violating the rights by not having hearings, by not having witnesses, by not having testimony, by not having clear and convincing evidence. They're using guardianship as a tool to settle family squabbles. And it's cost the family at this point somewhere between $600,000 and $1 million.
Money that they'll never see again, that's for sure.
Like that, they'll never see that again.
Right. Looking forward, what do you see down the pike with your interventions and efforts to make this right?
I'm finding that appeals and federal court and probably the United States Supreme Court are not going to be effective. I think the most effective way is to have the public rise up through videos like this, through books like yours, which I've read, through advocacy groups, which are popping up across the country, to symposiums, to continuing to file complaints with the federal government. There's quite a few regulatory agencies that can accept complaints. It's just getting them to open their eyes to what's going on. And this is a cottage industry which is making billions of dollars a year. And people in small communities don't realize how this can take your life and destroy your family and any legacy that was set aside for your family for all the hard work that they've done over the years.
Yeah, and the ripples go through generations. Tell me how your mother and or father fared during the guardianship.
My father, shortly after the guardianship was imposed, passed as a result of neglect, and I believe it was a wrongful death. He was just sent out to go on hospice. There was medical records which showed that there was overdoses given to him, that he was neglected in being taken to appointments, getting the proper medication, getting the proper diagnosis, and he passed in 2015, shortly after the guardianship was imposed on him.
And you're pretty sure he was medicated heavily?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, we never see the records. You can't prove it. And your mom?
My mother's been isolated into a locked facility against the family's wishes. She has a home that's paid for, and myself and my wife, I'm a retired public servant, 30 years. My wife's 35 years in the medical field. I'm an EMT. We're both registered caregivers, and we've got all the qualifications necessary to care for my mother in her home, which we were doing. But the court and the guardian felt that she would be better off in a locked facility, and so that they could sell the residence, which they're attempting to do. And so she's been isolated from me. She's also been being medicated, and I'm being prevented from seeing her. The law enforcement was contacted the last time I visited her, claiming that I was upsetting her.
Ah, boy, you know, that is the same BS excuse in almost every case where the facility owners decide that they don't want to have the trouble you guys bring by actually visiting with a loved one. And they say, oh, when they visit, the ward gets so excited or anxious. Well, of course they do. They want to see you. They're excited. They're tearful. You know, that's maybe the worst part of this, when either the judge orders a stay away order like happened to me or others, or the facility owner, because it's a private facility, they want to arrest you for trespassing. I think that's the worst, most disgusting part of this entire racket.
I had a witness. We had video. My mother was extremely happy holding my hand. We were polite and professional, and we were having a conversation. She was upset that I had to leave, is what she was upset with. She wanted to go with me.
Of course, and they depend on that, of course. Were you ever asked to pay to visit her?
I don't believe that I've ever been asked to pay to visit her, but I've been restricted by a court order to visit her only on odd number days. And the day that I was there was an odd number day, and the law enforcement was contacted, and I chose not to have a confrontation with law enforcement, so I excused myself. But
and as you know, your story is horrible, like all of them are, but all of them follow the same train. It's it's guardianize, litigate, isolate, medicate, take the estate. We all know those phrases. But what would you say to someone who really didn't understand all of this yet? They haven't been a victim yet, but they have a loved one that they're concerned about. Maybe the loved one has some money. What would you say to them based on your experience?
well, there's a number of things that can be done prior to any kind of court involvement, especially at guardianship. One is family needs to explain to everyone involved what their wishes are. There should be videos of that. People should have that videoed. Try to have the best airtight trust and powers of attorney without the need for a guardianship. And possibly on an extreme basis, flee the country or flee the state that it's happening in. That's really going to be one of the only ways that you can prevent getting wrapped up into this, because once you're involved, they're going to keep you involved and keep draining your assets.
Right, and through these videos, we've actually learned some things, like having your advance directive signed by 3 independent notary publics, which constitutes a legal document that really can't be questioned and can't be overturned in the court. But you're right, other than death, it seems like leaving the country, or at least leaving the state, is the only way to escape this, because once they have their claws into you, it's permanent. Would you agree with that?
Take every precaution to avoid any type of legal involvement. Once they get you involved, it's over. You'll never get out of it, and you will end up penniless, bankrupt.
You know, it's been great to see you. I'm really sorry for your story and for all these awful stories, but if we don't tell these stories to as many people as we can, more people will suffer and more people will be taken into guardianship. Roger, I want to thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sugar, for AAAPG and all that you do for the victims. Thank you.